Everybody ready?
Yeah, I'm doing a really good job with the city water department.
Welcome, everyone.
Master plan for all their system.
Welcome to
interesting.
the September
Learn about the
26th
gauges and all
City Council work session. The first item up today, before we start, I really wanted to take a moment and we had one of our downtown officers who was hurt in the line of duty. Was it either yesterday? Was it yesterday? Day before yesterday. And so I wanted on our behalf to express concern for our officer, but I also wanted to say that we're glad he's out of the hospital and doing fine. So, but it seemed important to acknowledge that had happened. Okay, the first item up today is the West Eugene MX extension, and City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm just going to read just a couple paragraphs to kind of get us started and then turn it back over to you. As Council is aware, LTD has been working over the last 6 years on the planning, public involvement, and technical analysis for the proposed West Eugene extension of MX. LTD has completed all the federal requirements, including the environmental assessment, which reflects the analysis as well as proposed mitigation solutions for anticipated impacts. It is anticipated that FTA will concur with the LTD EA conclusion to issue a finding of no significant impact. The conversation around MX in our community really started many years ago with the adoption of TransPlan, which called for a complete network of bus rapid transit corridors throughout the Eugene-Springfield metro area. The first corridor was implemented in 2007, traveling from downtown Eugene to downtown Springfield. The second corridor was completed in 2011, linking downtown Springfield to the Gateway Mall and the Peace Health Riverbend campus. The Eugene City Council initiated planning for the third corridor by voting to prioritize West 11th as the next corridor. On March 9, 2011, the City Council voted to support LTD's construction of MX in West Eugene and selected the 6th, 7th, 11th route as the preferred route for West Eugene MX. Council held a subsequent work session on February 13, 2012, to receive information on property impacts and mitigation options. One of the key pillars for the Envision Eugene plan is to promote compact urban development and efficient transportation options. The plan assumes that new development and redevelopment will be integrated into the downtown, key transit corridors, and core commercial areas while protecting and enhancing neighborhood livability. High-quality, frequent transit service that supports and encourages planned density is an important part to achieving the goals of Envision Eugene. Over the past years, the community has engaged in a very robust conversation about the West Eugene MX decision. Much of the dialogue has been focused on the technical merits and analysis of the project, including projected ridership, cost efficiency, and property owner impacts. While some may disagree, I believe that LTD has sufficiently eliminated or satisfactorily mitigated all major impacts to parking, traffic, noise, or businesses, and my recommendation to you is to support the West Eugene extension. While not everybody will be satisfied with the outcome of the West Eugene MX extension debate, I believe that MX is an important part of achieving the goals of Envision Eugene, which is to create a livable, sustainable, beautiful, and prosperous Eugene. Thank you.
Manager, I'm going to go like this. I'm going to have our council president put it on the table, and then I have Mike, and I assume George in the queue here. So, okay.
You can go first.
Go first? Okay.
He can.
All right. Fine with me. All right, so, George Brown, you want to put it on the motion on the table, please?
Yes, Mayor. I move to approve LTD's construction of the West Eugene 6th, 7th, and 11th MX corridor.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Okay, Councilor Clark.
I'm sorry, I was saying that
Councilor
since
Cole.
he's got a motion, I'd let
Yep.
George go first.
I will go ahead and put out my intended motion, and if I get a second, I'd like to speak to it.
Second.
But before I do that, I would like to say up front, first and foremost, this is not about being against the triple bottom line. It's not about being against public or mass transit or the EMX system itself, although I'm sure some in this community will try and label me as an anti-environmentalist and against public transportation. That's not the issue. The issue that I'm discussing is the fact that I believe that this needs to go to the voters of the LTD district. And I had a long discussion with Glenn Klein about this. It would have to be an advisory vote. If it was a mandate, it would only be the city of Eugene, and it would have to be by charter amendment, which I don't think just going to the city of Eugene would be right, because this involves more than just the city of Eugene. This involves the entire LTD district. So therefore, this is an advisory vote anyway, and we all know what happens to advisory votes in this community, but at least I'm going to try to get it out there. The reasons for this motion is, like I said, it affects more than just Eugene. It's a $95 million of taxpayer money that, although it's not coming out of the city's funds, it's federal and state monies, it is taxpayer monies, and with that amount of money, and with the public involvement that this issue has created, I feel that we need to send this out to a district-wide vote. Also, people that own property or businesses along this route, whether it be 6th, 7th, or 11th, if they do not live in the city, they would not get a voice on a vote. And they are the ones that are going to be directly impacted by this route. So by opening up to a district-wide vote, hopefully this will capture more people that are directly impacted by what happens with the route. Also, the FTA is looking for community support. If there's that much support in the community, then a vote by the district-wide vote on this issue, what better way to show the FTA that they have community support, which is one of the requirements before they grant federal funding. And before I run out of time, I'll put the motion out as I move to direct the city manager to inform LTD that the city council will approve the West 11th EMX route corridor if and only if LTD refers to its voters the question of whether the West 11th extension be built and a majority of the votes approve the ballot measure.
Now I'll second.
Moved and seconded.
And if I could speak to the motion. This is not an 11th hour move. Previous council meetings, I have asked, can we have a meeting to discuss what the city council's direction will be if this comes to a vote on the EMX steering committee, which I'm a member of and have been since been on the council. In fact, I was on the Coburg Road Corridor stakeholders group before being elected to the, or being on the council. So it's not like I'm new to the BRT system. But in each of those meetings, and I can recall 2 or 3 different times where I've asked in a public meeting, can we discuss this at a council meeting? I have been told now is not the time. We have to wait until all the studies come back, the public comment period comes in, and then we can make our final vote after that. So following the process that was laid out, this is why I'm bringing this forward. It's not an 11th hour move on my part as it was characterized the other night. In fact, the 11th hour move, I think, were by the people that supported this. Because it wasn't until Monday night's meeting that we had the overwhelming majority of the people testify in favor of the EMX. I've been at many EMX steering committees meetings and public hearings and read many emails and phone calls, and a majority of those people that testified, and granted some of them may be the same people over and over again, but the majority of the testimony that we've received has been in opposition. Now, there have been people that are, in fact, supporting it, but the majority of the testimony has been in opposition. The interesting thing about Monday night's meeting, not a single person from Ward 4 was present to testify, yet I'm told to represent my constituents by one of the speakers. Vote how your constituents represent. Well, or how your constituents want you to. Well, of the people that I've personally contacted in my ward, again, it's either personal contacts or phone calls, a majority of those people have either said no on building it, or they're in favor of the system, which I am too, but it needs to go out to a vote. Again, it's $95 million of taxpayers' money. And a comment was made Monday night, well, if we had to vote on every route, we wouldn't go anywhere. A good example was the Lowell route. There was opposition to that. Well, Lowell was not a $95 million project either. But there have been routes that did not go out to the public for vote, which I was involved in, and that's, the Franklin and the second route, which is the Springfield up to the hospital and back. We're currently working on the very very beginning stages of the route down to LCC. The Coburg Road corridor route never got past council because the process that we were faced with, the very first meeting, and I'll go for another round, please.
Yes, thank you.
Sure, I'll speak to not only the motion, but to the subject at hand. George, I'm not going to support your motion. I think I've made it pretty clear, if not articulating it, but definitely not supporting the no-build comments. I actually had an opportunity this last week to ride the bus a bit. My husband took my car and went to California, so I had to work, and so I'm on the bus. And it's really kind of an eye-opener for somebody like me, and I don't really consider myself privileged, but I definitely felt I definitely got to visit and see how people who depend on the service interact with each other. It was really kind of heartfelt, just coming in from Four Corners downtown. You know, people on wheelchairs were helping moms with their kids and their third bag of groceries, you know, and it just really made me realize, you know, that anything that helps people get from A to B publicly is really a good thing. So I just can't go with your motion, George. The other thing I want to say, I guess, is, you know, when we talk about advisory vote, you know, I wasn't on council. You know, I've only been on council going on 8 years, and when I think about the West Eugene Parkway, and I know it's going to get said in here, so I thought I'd just go ahead and put it out there. You know, I've been reflecting on this quite a bit, and all those were advisory votes. There was never any money for that, and I don't want to go down that route again because I think it was very polarizing for this community when they're saying go ahead and build it, and there was never any money for it. And then so we as a city council decided not to continue with that plan because there wasn't any money for it. And so I don't want to set this council up for it for the future. Thank you, Mayor.
Anybody else in the queue? Helen?
Yeah, George, I'm not going to be able to support your motion either. I agree with you. The idea is not at the 11th hour, but I think this motion is. I think this motion, if we were to consider it, should have been considered a long time ago. I don't believe that the council needs to vote on everything, and we shouldn't vote on everything. We're elected to make decisions like this, just like this, and I think that's what a representative democracy is all about. And this particular process, I think, has had particular project has had more public process than anything I have seen in the time that I've lived in Eugene, which is almost 30 years, including the Envision Eugene process. So I think that there's been more than ample public process and input into this at multiple levels, at the federal level and at the state level and at the from ODOT and the FTA and in our local community as well. So, and at each phase, those that are in the approval position have checked off on this project as being a worthy and credible project. And then finally, my understanding is that if we were to do a district-wide LTD vote and it was a standalone vote, it would cost $500,000 approximately, according to LTD folks, to do that standalone vote. If it were bundled with other things, it might cost as little as $250,000, but $500,000 is an awful lot of money that we don't have right now, and I think it's something that we should vote on. And I'll speak to the motion after the vote of this.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I won't be able to support the motion either, George. Unlike local street repair projects, which do go to the voters, mass transit projects typically do not. It's a decision of the public utility, the transit authority, and the elected officials. Seems like the time to vote would have been years ago whether we want to have a mass transit system like this or not. That would have been an appropriate time to ask the public. But to vote on each leg of a project is typically, that's not how it works around the country. There may be some towns that I'm unaware of where they do stuff like that, but typically it's the elected officials' job to make that decision after they've informed themselves, listening to critics and proponents, looking at the technical aspects, reading about, the environmental assessment and all that. And so I think it's appropriate that we not refer this to the voters. It's, really, the opponents could have gathered signatures. There was ample time to do that. And we do have a referendum process, but I feel it's inappropriate. It is kind of a last-minute thing to try to put this on the ballot. It wouldn't make it to the November ballot. It wouldn't be till next year. I think that would seriously jeopardize the funding. We'll have a new Congress. We don't know what that new Congress will be like. We don't know what would happen to the funding, which seems pretty certain now. So for these reasons, I won't be able to support it.
Mike and then Betty.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll look forward to making more general comments after we've finished with this vote. But with regard to this one, I'll say that from all of the emails and all of the phone calls that I've received from my constituents in Ward 5, folks are very evenly split on the question of MX out West 11. But in the last few days, I've received an avalanche of emails urging me to vote in favor of George's motion to put this out to a public vote. So I will, out of respect for the number of emails I got on this, support your motion.
Betty?
Voting for this motion would be the same as voting to kill the project. And I think it would be easy to evade voting on it, but I think it's our job to vote on it today.
Okay, George?
Well, in reference to the timing, again, it's not my fault. I asked a number of times about when are we going to have the meeting to come up with our final decision. This is the time for the final decision. The other day we had lunch, Pat, George, and Mike and I had lunch with, and I can't pronounce the gentleman's last name. He's the regional administrator for the FTA. During that meeting, I pointed out how the structure of the process that we have to follow is bad, because you have to invest so much time and so much money to get to the point where you make a final decision. And by that time, I feel like we're trapped. It's either we go forward or we're going to lose the money and we're going to be eliminated from any other projects. That's wrong. And he agreed that the process, there are mistakes in the process, and he says they're changing that. So there's not as much time and money invested in studying a route. This won't kill the project. If there's the public support that everybody feels there is for this, it meets one of the qualifications that FTA is asking for, a show of community support. I don't think there's that wide of community support for this project based on what I've been hearing, based on a recent poll where 45% of the people polled, and we know how you can work questions and figures on that, we're not in favor of it. So if FTA wants a show of community support, I think this is one of the best ways to do it. Again, this is not about me not being in favor of public transportation or alternate modes of transportation. It's not about me being opposed to the triple bottom line. I understand that. I get it. I'm okay with it. I'm in favor of it. It's about this particular route being raised to such a level of community awareness about the input that I've received, and I think this is the right thing to do by putting it out to a public vote. And I think that we should pass my motion and send it over to LTD for the final decision.
I think we're ready to vote on George's motion. All those in favor, please indicate. 3 in favor. In opposition? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in opposition. It does not pass. We're back to the main motion. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to say that this process has been a very difficult one for me. From the very beginning of this discussion, and we started this for this particular route over a year and a half ago, that I recall, I have been against it for the same 3 reasons. I have strong concern over the long-term capacity to fund it. I have a problem with the governance model, and I think it affects the local businesses along the route disproportionately. And so, as somebody who's now had a chance to serve for a while, I've learned to read the tea leaves a little bit here, and I understand that this is going to pass today. That's what I believe. And so I'm faced with a choice. I can vote no and stomp my feet and lose. Or I can decide to support this with the caveat that there are some parts about this process I'd like to see fixed, and hopefully have the support of the proponents of this to help try to fix those. Now, the reason, there's another couple of reasons to do this. One, for me, one of them is that I'm not against the system as a whole, but I am against this particular route. Based on what I know so far, I'd like to see us pursuing the route to LCC. I think that has merit to it based on what I know today. And so I would hate to send the signal to the federal folks that, they should take their ball and go home. I would like to make sure that there's longer-term support for the system, so that's another reason to support it. I understand the argument for those that say this is more than we need in the community, but there are several things in our community we're very proud of that are more than we need. I'm proud to be a Duck fan. The Holt Center is a beautiful place. It's more than we need, but I think there are a lot of folks that are proud of it. So I can understand that argument, but I think this is something that will benefit the community in the long run. The other two pieces that I've had a concern with, the governance model and the issue of disproportionate effect to the business owners, I think can be affected at the legislature, and I've spoken with several of our legislators and some of the folks around the table here too who support it, and hope to have their help to change state law so that this goes easier on the folks on West 11th, and so that it becomes more accountable as a system. So with that level of support that I've been able to come up with so far, I'm proud to wear my little pin and become a yes vote today.
Okay. Let's see. I've got George Polling and Andrea in the queue. George.
I know this is going to pass, and I know that I'm bound by council agreement that the next EMX steering committee, when we vote to move it forward to the LTD board with approval, I will support that. I will support the decision of the council like I have done many other times. I am going to vote against it. It's not that I'm opposed to the route. Is it the perfect route? No. Is it the best route we could come up with? Yeah, based on what we were given to deal with. I feel strongly enough that it needs to go to a public vote that I cannot support moving it forward to LTD to move the project forward. So again, I want to emphasize the fact that I am a supporter of public transportation, of the BRT, of the EMX system. I've been on the EMX steering committee, like I said, since being on the council since 2003, and I've worked hard on all the routes that we've looked at. I continue to work hard, and I will continue to work that hard as long as I'm allowed to stay on the EMX steering committee. There are some good people on all the committees that I've worked on with the BRT Coburg Road Stakeholders Group and the EMX steering committee and the LTD board members. They're good people. They're good, hard-working people trying to do the best they can. But I think the system that we're dealing with, the process that we're dealing with to get to point A is seriously flawed and needs to be looked at again, and I hope the FTA will do that. I just think that, like I said, this is something that I have to do based on the input that I've gotten. I think that the West 11th route that we've chosen, like I said, based on what we were given, is probably the best route that we could come up with. So my no vote is not against public transportation, or not against the triple bottom line or anything of that nature.
Andrea.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, George. I appreciate your comments. I feel like I've been there a lot of times where I'm the vote that makes a decision, and it kind of feels a little lonely, but today I'm not going to feel lonely. So I just want to say a couple things, and then I have some questions. So I believe that there was a good public process, and that I feel like, I kind of paid attention to this pretty much from the beginning, because it went out, it goes down through my ward, and actually my ward is in 100% support of this. I cannot say that I've talked to one person in Ward 7. I may have gotten some emails, but people that I see on a regular basis are all for this, and so I feel like that's what our charge is to represent our constituency. I feel like I'm doing that. So, Mayor, we've got quite a bit of work from this the KULAC Joint Committee, and there was some recommendations in here. What is it?
Clutech.
KULAC. So, and I really do think that, that we need to somehow embed in our motion or somehow make sure that the recommendations that come from this subcommittee, is kind of there, that we need to be diligent about it. And then I think we got a pretty good email from somebody who I respect, Mia. And so I just kind of was wondering if that was going to be a part of the work that's going to go forward, and how do we make sure that we do have that embedded in it?
Well, I think that my answer to that is whatever you want embedded is up to you. I think the information that we got from Clutac will be shared with, and has been shared with LTD, so they are familiar with this and know what that those interests are there. And I could also say that there is a, let's see if I can find that here. LTD is going to have a business assistance program where owners will be solicited to provide input into the design of the program and implementation throughout the project and development. And business development resources are going to be packaged and presented to the businesses along and adjacent to the corridor. They're going to include the Chamber of Commerce and SCORE and LCC Small Business Development Center and the City of Eugene Development Department and NEDCO, and there are going to be detailed mitigation plans that will include opportunities for businesses and residents to provide ongoing feedback to the contractor and LTD, a 24-hour direct communication line to LTD staff, regular corridor meetings in advance of construction, business access signage, opportunities for businesses to participate in the LTD web page microsite advertising and promotion of businesses provided by LTD, and other elements to be determined. So they're going to work really hard on working with the businesses involved.
So I had one more thing, and my time went away, so I'll just be short. So the other thing that I would want to say is that as we look at expansion, Councilor Clark, I don't know that LCC would be the best one, because River Road, Santa Clara, and Highway 99 are like, hey, what about us? So there's definitely interest out on the west side of Eugene.
Chris?
Thank you. One of the things that I enjoy most about serving on this body is watching people vote their conscience, but doing it in a thoughtful and deliberate way. And I appreciate every single one of us who, whether we agree or not, are really trying to do our best. And I really thank everybody for doing that. I view the vote today, if it passes, as not being our end of our involvement, but for me, the beginning of an entirely new involvement. Much of this route runs through my ward. Many of these people are people I directly represent, and I care very much how this impacts them. And whatever we need to do to ensure that that impact is minimized is what I will devote myself to doing, as I've said before. I served on the Corridor Study Committee, and one of the things that we did a lot of on that Corridor Study Committee was working on ways to mitigate, to create options to try to minimize the impact on businesses and transportation. I see that continuing. And so I see this as an important part of the overall transportation infrastructure for the city that we will become, but that doesn't mean that we need to hurt people in the here and the now. And so should this pass, I will view this as the opportunity to not only work on many of the issues that Councilor Clark has talked about, but also to make sure that the impacts on businesses today is absolutely minimized, and that we do the best job we can for the folks today as well as for the folks tomorrow.
Thank you. Alan?
So I'm in support of the West Eugene MX extension on West 11th. I think it's good for the economy, it's good for the environment, and it's good for the people of Eugene. MX will provide better service for less money, which is important to me. The West Eugene MX will reduce congestion. It will provide much-needed alternative modes of transportation, especially for those folks that have a hard time paying for gas and or don't even own a car and can't afford it. It will reduce air pollution, it'll help combat global warming, and it will stimulate that new transit-oriented development that we had planned in Envision Eugene, which I think is a big part of the Envision Eugene process along that corridor. I understand the fear and the impacts on the businesses along the routes. I met with them early on in this process and heard what they had to say. Over the time, I think LTD has learned a lot, has done a much better job of taking those considerations, those concerns into consideration, and has put forth all those things that the mayor just enumerated that I think will help mitigate those. And while there'll be some short-term impacts, I don't think they'll be as bad as people have said, but I think it will be they'll be sufficiently mitigated for me that we can move forward with this project. I also wanted to point out the joint Sustainability Commission and Planning Commission letter that came to us, the triple bottom line analysis that was unanimously supported by the Sustainability Commission and the Planning Commission on a 5-2 vote. And it is a really good example of where triple bottom line can help on one of these kind of sticky issues, where you talk about the impacts on social equity, the impacts on local economy, and the impacts on the environment. And I think it's well done, and it deserves us looking at it and our support. So MX is an important investment in Eugene's future, and I plan to vote yes.
Pat, and then George Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, I first heard about Eugene and Springfield's bus rapid transit years ago, before even Councilor Taylor, I believe, was on the City Council. I had a meeting with Steph Vigio and Sue Offord at the time at a restaurant in West Eugene, and it sounded like a fantastic plan to me. Bus rapid transit that addresses reaches of the entire community, and I'm looking forward to that. I was enthusiastic about it then, as I am enthusiastic about it today. That being said, I have reservations, and I have taken the time over the last few months to sit down and speak individually and privately at length with, I can count at least 20 people sitting in this room who I've actually spent face time with, getting their opinion, varied opinions, and everybody's opinion makes a great deal of difference to me, because everybody's opinion is valid, and everyone that spoke with me has made points that have made me think long and hard about this particular project. I'm not going to talk a great deal about my specific feelings about it. I wrote about it on Forum Lane, which is a public information blog. It can be accessed. You'll also see reports by the sheriff and extensive polling from the Lindholm Company on Forum Lane. So I won't talk about the specific issues that I have been dealing with in this public setting. But I will say that transit in Lane County is a big issue. It has been a big issue. Transit in West Eugene is a huge issue. And Councilor Ortiz has suggested that the West Eugene Parkway is going to be mentioned. Well, it is going to be mentioned. It'll be mentioned every time I talk about transit and about transportation in Eugene. The killing of the West Eugene Parkway had a significant impact on the viability of bus rapid transit. It had a significant impact that we will live with for a long time to come. It's been stated by people in this room that the West Eugene Parkway is dead. The project itself is dead, but the memories are not. We'll be living with the results of that decision for a long time to come. So as far as the cost of the system is concerned, a lot of federal money is being put into this, federal money that there's a great deal of competition for, that will create jobs in Eugene and the local Eugene-Springfield metropolitan area. And I think that that is a part of the U.S. government's ongoing funding and interest in providing a transportation system for the entire nation that includes the interstate highway system, it includes airports, and it includes a vast array of things. So this is just a part of transportation that is funded by the federal government. I'm glad to see it happening in Eugene and Springfield, as opposed to some of the other places that this money could have gone. It is a project that we will be able to use for many years to come, and I'm definitely in favor of the system at this point in time. That being said, decisions were made a couple of years ago that I once again believe were the wrong decision. We should be looking at a route to Bethel right now instead of a route along West 11th. That decision's been made. We are where we are. So for the future, in order to ensure what I believe is a viable system for the entire community, we have to move forward with this leg. I want to see it go to Bethel. I want to see it go to River Road, Coburg Road, ultimately South Eugene, certainly reaching out more into Springfield, beyond the community, and to LCC sooner than later. So I am a yes on this.
George Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. Right from the beginning of this whole process a couple of years ago. As a business owner along that will be affected by our businesses on the route, it's on the selected route. So I was particularly sensitive to the needs of every other small and large business along the route. We're really worried about possible negative effects to their ability to run their business successfully, and not only to survive, but to be successful after the system was built. So I, like the other counselors, I've read every email. I've attended all the meetings. I have had innumerable phone conversations and sit-downs with opponents and proponents. I've taken the time to read books out of class, books about mass transit and transit-oriented development. I've been over the Duncan and Brown's report on the impacts to the existing businesses and the proposed mitigations. I've read that 3 times in great detail, looked at all the maps. There's 117 properties that will be directly impacted, either with takings, license taking off, have to have their parking rearranged. I think LTD has done an outstanding job in mitigating the negative impacts to all of these businesses. And really, they want the businesses to succeed. These are the ones that are paying if their payroll taxes, are supporting the whole system. So they have no direct interest in harming a business. But they want the businesses to thrive, and so they'll hire more people and increase the payroll tax. The FTA actually is the one who'll be writing most of the checks. FTA in the state of Oregon, and they're every step of the way will be making sure that the mitigations are carried out and that there are no negative impacts to the businesses. There will be some during the construction. That's going to be kind of tough. I know that, but we've lived through 2, and we're getting ready to live through a 3rd with the redoing of Olive Street. It's kind of tough, but if your customers are loyal, they'll stick with you, and I think all of us should make special efforts to support these businesses during the construction and help them out, so that's not too tough on them. So I'm going to support the motion. It's an important leg in the whole system, and the whole thing, really, it only makes sense if you build the whole thing out. And so I will support it.
Mike and then Betty.
Thank you, Mayor. I certainly agree with my colleagues that we need to take a very close look at the Bethel area and River Road and 99 and give it more attention, specifically 99. I think we haven't given that corridor the attention that it needs and deserves. I hope my colleagues will consider that while this project and while this system will be a benefit for a number of people, I don't for a minute think that it will lessen the need for capacity through the area. And I know that I recognize the truth of what Pat was mentioning with regard to the lingering effects of the discussion of capacity enhancement out towards West Eugene. I hope we won't consider this a substitute for continuing to work on increasing our capacity needs out West Eugene for auto as well. I also wanted to take a minute to be more specific. I did read in the newspaper some of the details of the things I'd hoped to do to make the system better as we move forward. One with regard to the governance of and the issue of eminent domain. I think that needs to be done by elected people rather than appointed people, and that takes a statutory change, so hopefully we'll be able to work with the legislature on that. The second piece, though, for me, the LTD's done a wonderful job with mitigation discussions and efforts to this point, but there are some parts of it that don't quite go far enough for me. That sometimes, for example, if there's an eminent domain question about a piece of property that may subject to condemnation, the property owner will be compensated for that as a natural part of the process. But sometimes the property owner and the business owner aren't the same thing. somebody could own a property and lease it to the business, and the business itself might lose a couple of parking places, which could cause some serious financial harm. My point of what I would like to do, and as it moves the system forward in the future, is allow that the business owner who can show financial harm, and obviously the devil's in the details there, but the business owner that can show financial harm will have the capacity for a credit back on their LTD tax such that they're made and kept financially whole from the effect of the process on them. And the reason for that is that the value of this system that the whole community can enjoy should never be borne by the small number of, disproportionately by those small number of folks along the route. Thank you.
Betty?
Thank you. This has been a very difficult decision for me. I am voting for the motion, but for a number of reasons, the effect on the businesses, and I know that there will be an effect, and I know that sometimes there's a lasting effect as people develop new habits and don't go back to the old ones. And I worry that the operating costs may detract from other bus service. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I've worried about that. And if I had my wishes, I would wish for a light rail system, and I would wish for small buses going all over the city, which we are not getting right now. I finally made up my mind when Ron Kilcon took me for a tour, which I requested, of the housing, which I wasn't really aware of how much housing there is that could use this bus service. And I also wasn't aware that a part of the project, or if I heard it before I'd forgotten it, the part of the project was putting bridges across Amazon Creek so that rather dense housing south of Amazon Creek will have pedestrian access to a bus, which they don't have now. And I was thinking originally of why would we want a bus to go to Target, because we want people to come downtown. But then I realized that there are a lot of people who could come to use the library more easily and with less pollution if they use this. The biggest thing is I think it's the only way we're going to get 10-minute bus service in the foreseeable future. And I know that 10-minute service is a huge incentive to use a bus. From my own experience, I know that if I decide to ride a bus and I just miss one and I have to wait 30 minutes or 45 minutes, I'm not going to do that next time. But if it's 10 minutes, as happened to me recently when I went from downtown to the university, the bus had just left, and there was no big deal because 10 more minutes there was another bus. And I think that that's the biggest thing that will increase ridership, which is what we want to do. And I also think that I did prefer the 99 route to the 11th Street as the first one. And I think that was really, I still think that was a better way to go the first time, but that didn't happen. How much time do I have?
30
seconds. Something else. I don't want to lose the time, what I want to say. I guess that's enough for now. Thanks.
So I just want to thank everyone for the conversation, all those who have spent so much time participating in this at the community level, all those around this table. I most appreciate the conversation that speaks to the good intention of everyone around the table. It speaks to our community desire and our council desire to be doing the best that we can for our community. And I hold the belief that all those around this table do so. And I hold the belief that all those around this table do so and did so in past kinds of decisions as well. And I appreciate it when people say once the decision is made that we move on and don't keep revisiting past decisions but move on into the future together. And I think that's what our community expects of us. And so I look forward to the work we do together, and I appreciate, again, everybody's input. Ready to vote on this? All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In opposition? 1. It passes. Thank you all very, very much. So now we're going to move on to our next item, transition.
Mayor, we're just going to need a couple minutes to get ourselves.
Works.
that's right. Sorry about that.
Oh, here, let me slide over, Pat. You're right, Betty.
Part of my whole table?
Yeah.
Why? What did I say that made you want to change back?
Yeah, I know. Time for another one, right? I know.
I wanted to say we did right.
You want mine?
But I ate them.
Might be a little joke, is it?
Everybody ready?
Sure.
City Manager? Here we go.
Probably going to get a couple emails.
Well, we'll start. Michael, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
So why don't we we got a limited time and a very important topic to launch into. That's our Opportunity Eugene follow-up, and I'm going to ask Michael Wissett to launch us into this conversation.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor and councilors today. As the mayor mentioned, I came to update and revisit following our July 18th work session related to Opportunity Eugene and the policy framework and site analysis. So for today's meeting, I have us give a brief community update, a review of the policy framework, the site and process analysis, and the steps to follow. For our community update, I'd just like to mention that Shelter Care is embarking on their first ever capital campaign for their new building at 499 West 4th. This expansion will create and increase services and expand outreach by creating a central hub for Shelter Care services. The expansion of the Lindholm Day Use Center by St. Vincent de Paul is currently in the works. It will be a two-stage process. The smaller expansion will be done before winter and a complete expansion into the spring. This allows for the center to remain open throughout the winter. St. Vincent de Paul and City of Eugene car camping program contract for next year is in development. Last year's one-time funding of $50,000 for the expansion of the program also expires at the end of this calendar year. And also related to car camping, the amendment to the car camping ordinance that allows tent camping at car camping sites will also expire at the end of this calendar year. We've also been provided an update from the Human Services Commission at Lane County. And what this is it's unmet needs calculator that the county calculates based off its homelessness surveys. This calculator uses the homeless point-in-time survey done every year and information from providers to identify the needs for different types of sheltering as related to different characteristics of the homeless population. The negative numbers in the left column indicate a surplus of beds. And while the purpose is not to focus on absolute numbers, this calculator does paint a picture of the character of the problem within the community and where strengths and gaps exist with services provided. What becomes clear in this analysis is the large need for permanent supportive housing for individuals, if you look to the right, which numbers out at 1,128. Following our last meeting, staff was advised to work on finalizing the policy framework presented at the last meeting and evaluate recommendations of the Opportunity Eugene Task Force. In addition to this, staff was asked to identify and evaluate potential public and private sites and the process options to establish one or more of these sites. Since that time, much work has been done related to these. A quick overview of the policy framework we discussed last time. This was to assist in decision-making related to homelessness policy in the City of Eugene. The framework is as follows. transition people away from homelessness, create and promote health, safety, and security throughout the community, utilize partnerships, share resources with stakeholders, promote neighborhood livability, promote sustainability, have measurable outcomes, and to pilot all new programs. After we met last time, it was clear that the emphasis was to work on both that, but also to begin identifying and evaluate potential public and private sites. Preliminary analysis has led to hundreds of sites within the UGB that are also within a quarter mile of transportation, two of the main criteria we use to run an analysis. This includes LTD sites, county-owned sites, housing authority sites, as well as parks. These sites typically range in size from 80 acres to 1/10 of an acre. Majority of the sites are less than 1 acre. This is following staff's removal of a number of unsuitable right-of-way sites. Staff has also developed a matrix of land use processes for various zoning designations. Regulatory issues are site-specific and may vary depending upon the intended uses. Due to the breadth of our preliminary analysis, remaining questions about intended uses and the site-specific nature of regulatory issues, we return to you today seeking further guidance on how to approach a future site analysis. There are a number of considerations affecting site selection. Many of these are related to the type and tenure of service that will be provided. Emergency and temporary service respond to immediate need. These measures also may include activities such as expanding car camping, creating a seasonal camp, or bolstering existing services through the winter season. Transitional services, in the middle of the continuum above, are programs to assist the transition from homelessness to long-term stable housing. Activities related to this include rental assistance, subsidized housing, and sheltering. And further down the continuum, we have supportive housing, which takes more resources and more time but reaps the most benefits towards ending homelessness. Other considerations are who are we planning to serve? The needs of specific groups will weigh considerably on the suitability of particular sites. Is there a particular focus or approach council would like to take in addressing the needs of these particular groups, primarily as broken out by the family or by the county? We have families with children, individual adults, or individual children. Other considerations include the size of the groups we want to help and the scale of the use of the site. Should the focus be to pursue smaller scattered sites for small-scale car and tent camping, or should we work to identify larger sites for larger projects, such as a large camp, shelter, or affordable housing sites? Also, guidance is asked in figuring out exactly if we want to promote existing services, venture into new pilot programs, or do a balance of the two. It is staff's goal today to gain more clarity in identifying these issues so that we can continue our analysis of potential sites. Guidance provided by council on these criteria will further assist staff in developing an inventory of sites. Proposals for following this meeting. If we can get some guidance on what further criteria to use in our analysis. The goal is for October 17th to review a site analysis, get preliminary direction on a potential site, and discuss the public involvement of that. Following that, we would schedule another October meeting to continue that discussion and talk about the site-specific regulatory processes and further public involvement. And following that, with a goal of November, we would work to finalize direction on the site and then complete discussions related to the site analysis. On your tables in front of you, you'll find notebooks which serve as a resource guide related to homelessness issues. These will be continually updated, but will serve as more of a resource for you to come back to when considering these issues. So for now, I would like to open it up to conversation. Your question.
A little light here, and then we'll begin. Michael, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is I know that what St. Vinny's is working on with the service station is being able to have more capacity and more hours open for daytime usage, right? So that sort of meets that one of the opportunity Eugene goals was that we would find more places where people can legally and be during the day and get their needs met. And the other thing is that I know that I heard that the mission is adding 100 new beds. So that's 100 new beds of capacity for single individuals, right? And then it's probably in the male unit, is that what it is?
The addition at Eugene was for women with children.
It's for women and children.
Their own specific, building. And, the Lindholm Center will be expanding. I'm not sure about hours expansion, but it'll definitely be increasing their capacity. The second phase of the project would quadruple their capacity, as well as install a commercial kitchen.
Mike, and then George Polling.
Thank you, Mayor. For me, the central question of this revolves around the policy question of the one large camp. That was a part of the work done by the task force making that recommendation. And I appreciated their work and saw that information and read that. But I've also had, I suppose, anecdotal information is the best way to say it, over time about the bad idea of one large facility. And I'd like to have from staff a better, and I can't remember if I mentioned this before or not, but a better depth of information about concerns that might be associated with one large camp. I know that, there are those who would say that at the camp this last winter, that when the man was killed, that was obviously a reflection of something in the large camp that went wrong. I don't necessarily know if I would say that, but I've heard that said in my ward. If that's so, why would staff suggest that was the case? Why is a large clustering of folks necessarily a good or a bad thing? I know that Cindy Wheeldryer worked very hard some time ago to have a camp in the county area that, for whatever reason, was disbanded and didn't work. I'd like to know the reasons around why that went away, so that we can understand what challenges they faced. That's all readily available information from our partners at the county. So what happened there? Why didn't it work? These are the sort of things I think we need to talk about in order for us to really evaluate the central question of, is a large camp a good idea, or should we be increasing the capacity and the availability for smaller or mid-sized opportunities for people? Thank you.
Do you have anything you want to yes.
Yes,
We do. Go ahead, Sarah.
And maybe Michael was going to do this, and probably more appropriate because I wasn't on the task force, but in my reviewing of the task force and related material, the report didn't recommend one large camp. It recommended a safe and secure sites with the S in parentheses, and I think that was part of the concern, is that there was not consensus around, is one large camp the right answer? It was used as an example. There's definitely a contingency of the task force that believe one large camp is a good idea and something we should continue to pursue. That's been a challenge for us in trying to narrow down a list of possible locations.
Right.
We're not clear that one large camp is the right solution.
I think that's a policy discussion, and what I'm saying, I guess, is I would love to have more help in making a better informed decision about whether that's a good idea or a bad idea.
Hey, George Polling.
I thought I heard early in your presentation that the extension of the number of allowable sites in the car camping, that part of the ordinance is expiring soon?
It was two separate pieces. The ordinance itself allowed tents to be defined as vehicles for the purpose of car camping. That's expiring at the end of the year. From the closure of the occupied change camp last year, there was an extra $50,000 given to St. Vincent de Paul to expand their car camping program to help absorb some of the people who might be leaving the camp. That was one-time funding. That also runs through the end of the calendar year. So there's the ordinance expiring, defining tents as an allowable use in car camping. There's also the end of the one-time funding.
So what would it take, or what do we need to do to extend that ordinance to include tents as definition to be allowed in car camping in I suppose we need some more money to extend the number of sites, is that correct?
That's correct. As far as the ordinance, we would just need an interest on the council to bring that back, and we would do that over the next couple of months to try to make that as seamless as possible.
So when does that expire?
The end of the calendar year, so.
Okay. So I am real interested in extending the part of the ordinance that describes tents as allowable. And also, I realize we're really short on funds, but I would also like to have that discussion about funding so we can continue the number of sites in these car camps.
And Mayor, we would not need a motion on that, just sort of a general sense of, yes, people would like us to bring that back, not indicating whether you support that or not,
Looking
but
around
if
for
you want that back.
nodding heads here, nodding heads.
Alan's was just nodding because he's falling asleep.
He nods all the time. One of those little
Bobblehead,
I think you can take that as a
My own
bobblehead
bobblehead.
response.
Okay, so we will do that then on both of
the
those
other-
items that George does.
And the other thing, I had a flurry of emails a couple of weeks ago from another elected official from one of the commissioners about a list that was generated with publicly owned properties and wanted to know why the county had property on our list of possible sites. I think we've managed to get that problem temporarily resolved. But before we go any further with putting non-city public properties on any lists, I think we need to get buy-in from those property owners before we start any discussion. Now, I realize that you've got to make the list up to figure out, is this owned by schools or by the city or by the county? But after that point, I think if we have a further discussion about county property, school property, whatever, we need to get buy-in from them to continue that discussion. Otherwise, they should not be on any further list for discussions.
George?
Yes, ma'am.
I would just add to that probably any list that goes around should have a descriptor at the top of it that says this is, just a general list for us to look at with no specific intention for going after any of those particular properties. Okay, Andrea.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for bringing this forward once again. So I hear the conversation really around the camp and the criteria, but there's a book here that we were handed that behind tab 41112 on page 3 of the report, one of the things that I was interested in seeing and hearing about was the kind of the scan of laws and ordinances that make it hard for people who are homeless to be. That wouldn't be the answer to homelessness, but I think that if people are car camping or tent camping somewhere that they're not supposed to be, and they're not bothering anybody, I mean, if they're reported on private property in somebody's backyard, that's another story, but there's a lot of places in the city that people do tend to camp, and I think it's pretty disruptive, people trying to, be in their lives. I mean, I know how I am when I'm sleep deprived and I'm not at my best. So I can't imagine what it would be like not knowing before you lay your head that night if you're going to get woken up and told to move on. So I would hope that that process starts happening. And what I would say about adding capacity, that really, we can only, we're not in the business of doing that. We're in the business of helping be a partner for funding. And so I don't know, I think that as different organizations are doing their work, I think that that's their charge, and I think more our charge is around the money piece, is what can we do within the city budget, and what grants can we apply for, which I think that's kind of already being done, so it would be a little bit redundant to push that forward, but I think that we already do, and I think the whole community does yeoman's work. If I ever sound like I'm not happy with the situation, it's not that I don't think that that the staff and the city and the county aren't doing enough. It's more about the political will of what we're willing to put ourselves on the line for as far as things that are not comfortable for us. So, but I would like to see us look at those laws and ordinances that are on the books that are kind of harsh on people who are trying to sleep in the bushes, minding their own business.
George Brown.
Thanks, Mayor. I've looked through this book and I can't find a list of sites. Has it not been prepared? I mean, or
Well, we've-
missing it, or?
A list per se, we've just run a number of analyses. Like, there's no hard list as of right now that was ready for use, given the size. It was 410 sites long, or the last analysis we ran. We were hoping to provide a list once we were to get more feedback from council to work down more criteria to make it a more useful list for council.
I see. Well, my understanding was the direction that we gave last time in July was to have a list prepared so we could jump, get on it and look it over and start talking about specific sites. Of course, we would, as a council, would have to agree that we think it's a good idea, and we haven't done that yet. But it makes it impossible. I mean, it's like maybe we'll see it in October. I mean, it's just kind of seems like we're dragging our feet here and nothing's going to happen. And before we know it, the bad weather will be here and the problem will still be there, and we won't even have chipped away at it just one little bit. So I'm kind of disappointed not to see a list of sites, and I would like to see that as quickly as possible.
Sorry.
It's just, I mean, that's one of the first steps. And also, we need to decide as a council whether we want to do, have a transitional camp to begin with. And so I don't know if we'll make a decision today about that, but we need to decide that right off the bat. Otherwise, we can direct our energies in a different direction. But I favor that idea, and I favor the site on 13th, the Naval Reserve Center, as a transitional temporary place. It would be a pilot, and it would be for. I think it's really good to just go over again what's envisioned there from Opportunity Village is not a huge Occupy Eugene type of camp. That one didn't work so well. The one in 1993 worked by Austin Stadium, but it didn't work so well because you were mixing all these different populations with different needs and different abilities to live effectively in an environment like that. You had, chronic alcoholics, you had untreated people with untreated mental health problems and untreated drug problems, along with basically normal everyday people who just happen to be unhoused, and that's not going to work. Yes, I would, please.
Eric, I just respond in a couple ways. The council did ask us to start preparing the list of public and private properties, which we have started that analysis. I asked the staff not to bring a list, even a partial list today, really for a couple reasons. One is we're not sure what needs to be on the list. So, for example, if we're talking about a large camp versus small camps, the size of the site makes a big difference in that. So how do we know how to start narrowing down from what is several hundred? George talked today about before even something is on the list, we should notify the property owner of that. That's a whole nother criterion. And that wasn't a part of the initial direction from council. You might remember as we're going through the Envision Eugene process, and this isn't exactly the same, but there's some analogy in there that we've done a lot of work up front about what is it we're even trying to accomplish, and then it's where, and we're even still in the process of identifying sites and trying to be very thoughtful about infrastructure and all of those kinds of things. And so what will help us a lot is the more the council can help define what is the criteria you're looking for, then we can come back with sites that really start to meet those criteria. So it is a challenge for staff to do that, and which is why I asked them not to bring even the list that's not analyzed completely anyhow today. So.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, George. Gene Stacy, in the meeting in the public forum last week, said something that really rang a bell with me, and that's she made a reference to who are we looking at accommodating with a homeless camping site. And what she pointed out, something that we really need to make pretty public, is we're not in any way looking at something that resembles what was in the Willamette Greenway, which was the Eugene Occupy Eugene Camp Village. Nor are we looking at the picture that I'm looking at right now, which is Portland's Occupy Tent City. I'm looking at a picture of a tent city in Seattle that is more organized and orderly and cleaner and seems a little bit more user-friendly for the people who are there. So significantly, we need to be considering who are we going to be accommodating. And I know that a lot of the decisions that you're making at this point, City Manager, revolve around who are we going to accommodate, how large is the site, and how many sites are we going to be looking at. It would be irresponsible of you, would have been irresponsible to put forward a list at this point in time, because you're just going to raise alarm throughout the community. Oh boy, they're talking about my neighborhood. I heard over at the county commission office this morning that we were talking about the fairgrounds, and boy, after they were throwing eggs at me for even thinking about that. So, you know, it just raises alarm. That being said, you're in the business of not raising the alarm. I'm not necessarily in that business. So, you know, I've generated a small list of things that need to be, places that need to be considered as we move forward. And there, you know, we have private sites, public sites, not just City of Eugene-owned public sites, but 4J public sites, Bethel School District public sites, EWEB public sites, county public sites. Private sites, places that are being used, places that aren't being used, and just a broad array of areas in order to make sure that we are looking at all of the possibilities and the various kinds of impact on whatever site we do choose. Also, it will involve a greater segment of the community in the discussion once we do start to look at more of a semi-permanent site for the camping. You know, sites that I have are, you know, Alton Baker Park, Tugman Park, Civic Stadium, the fairgrounds, Bethel Park. You know, it's let's look throughout the community and let people get a personal feeling for what it may look like in their personal part of the city.
Already talked once.
You know, we've been accommodating camping in the city for a number of years. If you drive out to Bethesda Lutheran Church, you'll look at city-sanctioned homeless camping right in the parking lot of Bethesda Lutheran Church. We do it, and we do it well in this community. Certainly we don't do enough of it, and certainly there are people who want to live the rest of their lives in camping. There are people who want to get into a regular, more permanent home. Who are we trying to help? And you know, for my dollar, the people we're trying to help are the people who really want to move through temporary
Do you want another round,
camping.
Pat?
Yes, thank you.
I don't know if we're going to get to it given our
That's
time,
fine.
but we'll do our best here. So, Chris, you're next.
Thank you. I really appreciate the discussion. I agree with a lot of what is being said by everybody. I think that's very good. When I think about, you know, you showed the continuum up here. Here's a good example of one where you have competing dimensions. Two of them that occur to me that are very important in this conversation. The first one would be kind of the enthusiasm and the passion and the excitement that is at one end, which we see here. The other one is kind of the experience and the talent of the existing human resource network. I don't want to just say that it's the new folks versus the old folks, because that's really not what it is. But I think we need to bring those experienced folks back into the conversation. I know you've already been talking to them, but maybe bring them back in a more kind of deliberate and policy-oriented way to help guide us on our way. That leads me back to number 6 on the recommendations, which was to create the commission to continue to explore. This was a big one for me, and I think we should put the group back together again, because I think that group can help with this dimension. I think having that experience, particularly with what George talked about, the car camp that we had back in the 90s, with the enthusiasm of what we could have, and I don't want to just say, oh, I don't want to talk about what's new because I just want to be with what we already know about. It's got to be a blend of the two. We've got to be along there. Another dimension for me is how fast can we have it versus how thoughtful and slow we should be, and that's a really important one right now, because I know there's a great deal of concern about cold weather coming, and I don't want cold weather to become a driver that is forcing us into having limited choices, more limited choices than we really should be looking at. So I've already mentioned that we need to have a cold weather option in place even as we continue to talk about this. I know that's being worked on. Additional beds at the mission, turning Egan warming centers into a 24/7 kind of an operation. Whatever we can do to accommodate the cold weather needs that are coming buys us the time to be very thoughtful in terms of how we work the rest of this conversation. So In terms of the 6 recommendations, I can look at these and I can actually see a significant amount of progress on some of these. I look at number 3, improvement on healthcare access. There's been some incredible things that have happened around healthcare access. The tent healthcare and some other stuff that's been going on has been really impressive to me. One of the things I mentioned also was who are we serving? And so for purposes of kind of talking about that, I've made it clear early on that I don't see the city's role as supporting a lifestyle choice. I think it is the role of the city to support people who are seeking help to try to deal with a situation or homeless condition that was beyond their control. They lost their job, they had a medical catastrophe, they need help, and it is the city's, I think, appropriate role to provide whatever support it can to assist them. If somebody says it's a matter of my lifestyle, I want to be this way, and I want you to provide me a way to be this way, I wouldn't support that any more than I would support any other group. I've run over, so I'm sorry.
Eddie?
Thank you. The city is not going to solve the homeless problem, but I think it's one big thing we should be doing is urging the state to establish shelters. We need more homeless shelters. We used to have homeless shelters. We used to have mental institutions. We used to have orphanages, and there was a reason for all of those things. That will not do anything for us immediately, however, but that's something I think we should be doing long range. However, I do think the weather is an important factor. That's soon going to be maybe not cold, but wet and muddy. And if we can do some small part of helping some people who are transitional, I think we should do it. I thought the Opportunity Village proposal made sense. The people, we had volunteers develop a proposal for us, who had put a lot of thought into it, so that we did not have to do it, staff did not have to do it, and they were willing to do something which was temporary, not permanent. And the land is not a problem if we use land that the city already owns. I agree we shouldn't be talking about someone else's land without consulting them first. We did that once when we were talking about a new city hall, and it really upset someone. But I think when we have a group of volunteers who are really trustworthy, respected, knowledgeable people come to us with a plan and willing to execute it, that we might take advantage of that. And I don't know whether we've thrown that out or not, but we seem to be ignoring it at the moment. That's what I think we should do, is take advantage of what volunteers have gotten for us. It wouldn't be a permanent camp. It would be, by its very nature, temporary. The land is designated for something else in the future. And it would be transitional. And I do think that what we want to do is not give people a permanent place to live, but help people who are temporarily without housing, which could happen to a lot of us, one paycheck. Mm-hmm. And it's, so that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Alan?
Mark, can you put up the last slide?
The very last one?
Oh, I thought you said you did.
Can you go over that a little bit? More detail, please.
Yeah, well, it's depending on the progress made today. We have a scheduled work session again on October 17th. So I thought leading into that, we would be able to review a site analysis based on the information we gathered today. Then talk about the preliminary direction on potential sites, so kind of getting it more into the details after kind of working with you to figure out more criteria to help us refine our analysis. And then, with that comes the different processes we need to discuss, related to the site and the public involvement element for each site. And then following from that meeting, just kind of forecasting out into later October and November. We could continue the discussion depending on how it goes, discuss more of the matrix we developed related to site-specific regulatory issues. Once we had a smaller list of sites, that'd be a little bit easier to tackle. And then continue with the public involvement piece on what that might mean for the site-specific regulatory processes. And then the final meeting would be we've already come so far in the analysis, to make a final direction or decision based on our work together, and then complete the discussion related to a site.
So thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad to see that we have that kind of structured out that way. I want to move forward on the 6 recommendations of the task force and get into the specifics of them and what I think we need is this as a staff work plan that says here's how we're going to do this and here for each of the 6 items and a schedule to do that. This helps a little bit, but it's not quite the same thing. I think we need to move the site part along, and I too am not enamored with a site that looked like the Occupy site. That's not what I have in mind at all. It's more along the lines of Dignity Village and the sites that are seen in Seattle. So I'm supportive of a pilot of a smaller 20 to 30 person site, approval this fall. And I have specific, we're going to get into criteria, I'll throw out a list. I think it should not be permanent. I think it should be a pilot. I think it should be about 6 months long. I think it should be a city-owned site. We'll talk about the others later. If we go into others, we're not going to get anywhere fast. So it needs to be a city-owned site. It needs to be individuals. We'll deal with families second, later. I think there has to be a no drugs, no alcohol, no weapons policy at the place. It needs to be near transit. It has to have utilities, electric, water, and sewer. I think we need to think about the logistics of how you do bathrooms, showers, and garbage, and whether or not that's the city can help do that. I think it should be self-governed, and I think it should be structures and tents, but it shouldn't be as makeshift as, say, what we saw at the Occupy site. I think it should be more organized along the lines of some of the other sites that we've seen around the country. So that's my specific list that I'd like to move forward. And I think we need to get that list of sites soon. I think bringing it back if people like these criteria, then we can move forward as a filter to get some sites in the next meeting. And the other thing we think we need to do is really think about how we educate people about this issue. It's been around for a very, very long time. But we still need to educate a lot of Eugenians, and some of the comments that we've heard at some of the public forums and things like that. We still need to educate Eugenians about who the homeless people are. They are not all drug addicts and criminals. They are people that are down and out and hard on their luck, and those people that are one check away, and then that one check went away, that's who the people that we're talking about. So they're people that need a place to be, and are typically and have been good members of society and continue to be, but they just don't have a house. So we need to provide, I think, a place for them to be. So I'm supportive of those criteria just throughout, plus with a small pilot of 20 to 30 sites, 20 to 30 people.
I'd just like to make a couple, build on what Alan was talking about. First of all, if I had my way, we'd narrow the list down to city sites, things that we have some control over, because I think the other conversation is way too long and way too complicated and laden with dangerous paths. And we've had experience with that. I have said before publicly, and I remain concerned that if we're not going to get in the business of running it ourselves, which is a whole other question, then who is going to run it? And who's got the liability? And, all of those things that have to, who's the governing board? Who is this that's going to do this? I think that's a fundamental question. The question we've been asked thus far from the folks that was for a piece of land for them to take it up and do their own stuff on. And so your question is, if that's what you're going to do, what are you going to require in order to make that piece of land available? And I think there's some real responsibility and governance issues that we have to work our way through if we're going to do that. Last Friday at the City Club, they had a presentation from the school district about all the rising number of unhoused families with kids, and then the loss of some of the services we used to have at First Place for such families. And then I thought about that, and I thought about so those families with kids, and then I thought about what do we have the best chance of getting broad community support for to build services for. Families with kids are probably at the top of that list. And if you want to demonstrate in some way that we can make headway on providing more services for homeless people, and you can demonstrate that we can do that for a small, let's say there's 25 families out there waiting. If you say 4 kids in each family, you may